Hello and welcome to another episode of Osgoode Community Chronicles, where we explore the rich history, vibrant events, and remarkable stories that make up the Osgoode ward and surrounding communities. In each episode, we dive deep into our local heritage, drawing from the meticulous records and research of our local historians and families. These invaluable resources allow us to bring you stories from the past, ensuring that the traditions that shaped our community are shared with future generations. Whether you're a lifelong resident like me, or a newcomer, join us as we tie our fascinating history to the present-day version of our beloved region of Osgoode and surrounding communities. I'm your host, Tracy Daviero. Well, there sure is a lot going on in our country these days. Not to get political or controversial on this podcast, but it bears mentioning that we are in a very interesting place. Our Prime Minister has stepped down, the Liberal leadership race is taking place, the proroguing of Parliament, a provincial election, our own Councillor George Darou's moving to provincial politics, the U.S. tariffs, and on and on and on. No matter which party you align with, one amazing thing has happened in the last couple of weeks, though, and that is the collective shift to buying Canadian goods. Now, of course, there's the question, if it's made in Canada, but the profits go to a U.S. company, should we still buy it? That decision is yours. In general, I really like the movement. We probably should have all been doing this for a long time, but it's amazing to hear how so many people, so many Canadians, are coming together in solidarity for our country, which is the way it should be anyway. In today's episode, we will have our news and events calendar as usual. Our business segment today is about the Moses Sawmill in Osgoode Village. Our historical segment introduces us to the Moses family, of course. And our Community Voices segment is a poem by Knippel Potvin about Osgoode, and kind of about Canada. And we'll finish up with another mental health moment. Let's get into it. Every week on the podcast, we'll share some of the local events that are taking place in the area. So many great people doing awesome things. Please do be sure that you get out to support them when you can. A bit of news first. The Metcalfe Farmers Market first spring market, unfortunately, that was scheduled for February 22nd has been cancelled. The Greeley Community Centre has been booked for advance polling for the provincial election, and they were unable to find another suitable location for the spring market. The Rideau Snowmobile Club also has canceled their poker rally that was supposed to take place this weekend on February 8th due to weather conditions. With this cold weather and snow, the snowmobile clubs are working hard to get trails cleared and open. The Osgoode Snowmobile Club in particular is in need of more volunteers. If you ride the trails, get in touch with them so that you can make the load lighter for those who are getting out there to get things ready for our area. The more help they get, the sooner the trails will be open. They're currently fighting with damage from the windstorm, clearing trees and brush, putting up signage, and just annual setup. From February 6th to 8th this weekend, Manatic Shiverfest is taking place. Activities include the pancake breakfast, lots of outdoor activities, and it looks like it's going to be the weekend for it. Tomorrow, February 8th, Ross is having a community consultation in Greeley for seniors. If you're a senior living in Greeley or providing care or sharing a home with a senior parent, they want to hear from you. Starting at 10 a.m. at the community center, they are going to share all about Ross's services available to seniors living in Greeley and take feedback on programming they offer. It's free, and light snacks will also be available. This weekend in Vernon is the Vernon Winter Carnival with lots of activities, and also the Kenmore Winter Carnival takes place this weekend. It starts with the Youth Valentine Dance tonight and lots of outdoor activities there as well. And don't forget the chili cook-off lunch with the proceeds going to the Life's a Trip Foundation. Next week, February 11th, on Tuesday, the Osgoode Outreach is hosting their monthly luncheon, and this month they're having a Valentine's brunch at the Osgoode Legion, prepared by none other than Chef Tony Daviero. Brunch will be served at 10:15 a.m. Space is limited, so reserve your spot if you want to go. On February 15th, the Carleton Golf and Yacht Club is hosting their 2025 job fair. It starts at noon, and they're hiring for all positions. Don't forget to bring your resume. And February 18th and 25th is Wicked. The prequel to Wizard of Oz is being shown at the Senior Center in Kemptville. It's a free event, but you do need to RSVP ahead of time. And March 1st, a little ways out, but just giving you a month's notice here, the Stanley Sugar Bush will be open at Stanley's Old Maple Farm. More details will be available closer to the date, but I wanted to just flag that because it means that spring is on the way, doesn't it? Back to a little bit of hockey news. Sens are still holding on to a playoff spot, and the hockey has been so exciting. Well, except these games against Tampa. We don't go to a game until later in February, but we're really happy that things seem to be going well at this time of year, basically because typically they are not. Go Sens, go. The Four Nations Face-Off event takes place next weekend, and the buzz around that is awesome too. Games in Montreal and Boston, lots of NHL stars, and the Four Nations, Canada, USA, Finland, and Sweden. We always love to cheer for Team Canada. The Manotick Mariners' last home game takes place this weekend. February 9th at 2 p.m., they'll face the North Dundas Rockets. They're currently leading their division and third in the Eastern Conference. Go and cheer them on in their last season home game before the playoffs start. And that is our news and events for this week. In this week's Business Spotlight, we are talking about the Moses Sawmill in Osgoode Station. And this comes from the Osgoode Village Storybook, compiled by Joe Banks. The Moses Sawmill. The Boyd operation was by no means the only industrial concern during this busy era. Every rural settlement needed a sawmill, and Osgoode West and Osgoode Station could boast one of the finest in the region by 1907. It was started by William John Moses, who was born near Osgoode Station in 1843. He died in 1914. The son of Clark Moses, born in County Tyrone, England in 1808 and died in 1888 in Osgoode, and Matilda Clark, born 1786. William John Moses married Mary Acton, 1850 to 1921. 7 children were born of this union: Clark Wesley, Byron, Minnie, Maud, Chester, Edgar, Ethel, and Clark. The father built and operated mills through the country, including West Osgoode and Osgoode Village. The original stone Clark Moses house at Lot 34 has been restored. According to the 1871 census, William first lived on the Prescott Road at West Osgoode and owned and operated a sawmill there since 1860. The Kempville Advance wrote on February 12, 1907, "By far the largest dealer in Osgoode, or in fact in Carleton County, whose interests are situated in several parts of the country, as well as other points. Some idea of the amount of the business done by the firm can be formed when it is stated that the outlay for grain was $15,000, for logs $25,000, for lumber and other materials $16,700, while for help $418,800. 6 teams are always on the road, which are worth $2,400, and their maintenance costs as much per year. At Osgoode Village, Mr. Moses conducts a planing mill, a feed mill, a sash, door, and blind factory, a cheese box factory, as well as a huge grain warehouse, where flour, feed of all kinds, and grain are handled in large and small quantities. At West Osgoode is a large sawmill. At Vernon is a sawmill, box factory, veneering plant, and feed mill. At Carp is a planing mill, a box factory, and feed mill. At Farrelton, Quebec, is a sawmill. From this, then, it will be seen that the interests of the firm is extensive and far-reaching. Mr. Moses conducts one of the largest cheese box factories in eastern Ontario, as well as banana crates, apple boxes, and turned goods of all kinds. Mr. Moses, the proprietor, is a native of Osgoode, and at West Osgoode he has 2 good farms. That he is a distinct benefit to the country at large goes without saying. The lumber business was moved to the village in 1912, where Moses built a large granite block house which remains a distinctive landmark on Osgoode Main Street to this day. His mill was right across the street, and his property ran to the railroad tracks. A 1908 map of the village showed that he, along with the Taylor, Swerdfeger, Otto, and Cleland families, had purchased several lots at Osgoode Station.
His parcel included all property on the west side of George, now called Old George Street, and the north side of James Street, from the large brick house on George Street to the railroad tracks on the west. Not readily mentioned in the report was that he built the West Osgoode Anglican Church in 1886. In a 2005 interview, village native Bessie Edgar recalled living next to the mill. She said, in the spring, they would bring all these great big logs and they'd be piled up on the sleighs, and they'd make that into veneer to make the cheese boxes. Clark Moses. The seventh child of William John Moses, Clark Allen Moses, 1887 to 1957, followed his father and operated the sawmill in Osgoode Station. He married Laura Graham, 1891 to 1974, of Osgoode. Custom sawing was done, supplying building material for many houses. Cheese boxes were made here and supplied to all outlying factories. Two expert box makers, nailers, were Harold Clark and Jack Fairfield. It was a mystery to see Jack Fairfield with a row of nails in his mouth and pushed in place with his tongue when needed. With the flick of one hand and a tap of his hammer, the round box appeared before your eyes. Harold Clark then made the finish nailing to the bottom. The boiler needed continuous tending to heat water for softening the wood. Jess Humphrey, Horace Crawford, Ab Saunders, and John David Everett gave long service to the Moses Mill. In 1940, 80,000 feet of lumber was destroyed in a fire, which caused an estimated $12,000 damage and threatened the entire village. The fire was blamed on children who had been playing with a bonfire near the mill property. The neighboring brick home, occupied by Earl Stinson, also suffered damage to its roof. Village native Bessie Edgar recalled in a 2005 interview witnessing one of the fires that plagued the Moses operation. They kept wood stored there, and the chips would be everywhere, and it would get away from them. I can remember 3 big fires, and there was no firefighting equipment. And where the townhouses are there now, there was a great big building right across there. It cracked the windows. Enough men came out. The firefighters came from cars. They came from all over the place. Clark and Laura Moses are buried in the Prescott Road Cemetery. They had one son, Errol. Clark Moses died in 1957 at age 70 in his home in Osgoode and is buried with his wife Laura, who died in 1974 in her 84th year. Byron Moses. William John's first child, Byron, operated the mills at Vernon. He was born in 1874 and died in 1942. He married Teresa Brown, who was born in 1870 and died in 1930. The couple are buried in Elmview Cemetery in Cars, Ontario. They had 2 children, Thelma, born in 1899, and Frida, born in 1901. And that is a little bit about the Moses Sawmill. I was going to compile a lot of information and talk to you about the Moses Sawmill, but it is very easy whenever Joe puts together an interesting article like that for the publication, the Osgoode Village Story. So that's the one that I wanted to share with you. So thank you to Joe for that. The Moses Sawmill was located on Old George Street, or what is now Old George Street, in where the townhouses are. There were lots of them. We'll talk about them in the historical segment where all of the Moses Sawmill equipment and factories were. But that is our business spotlight for this week. This week's historical segment, we meet the Moses family. Clark Moses was born in Ireland, one of 11 children of Robert Moses and Matilda Clark. So I've gathered this information from a number of sources, and one of those is the Pioneer Family Storybook that Jean Reed wrote. And while there is a fair amount of information that is not here listed because there's only one volume that has the Moses family in it, I wanted to include some of the interesting facts that she told us about the family. So it's a little bit of a different historical update today. So Robert and Matilda's kids. Dr. William John Moses married Hannah Moon, and according to Jean Reed, in the Jean Reed Shepherd's Pioneer Family Story, he rode his white horse far into the wilderness to heal the sick, coming as far as Dalmany.
They had 3 children, Jane, Marianne, and Samuel. Next is Alexander, and then Margaret, who married Isaac Robinson and raised 11 children near Hexton. And James, Marianne, and Clark, who married Jane Allen. And they moved into the same lot as his brother until he sold his part. They were on East Half Lot 24, Concession 2, until he sold that to Benjamin Wright and Eliza Allen in 1848. On the map, that looks like it's around Cabin Road area, actually very close to my house now. And then they moved to Lot 35, Concession 1, just south of the village around Nixon Drive area. And the Moses owned quite a lot of property around there. And they lived on the south half of that lot, 35, while his wife's family, Arthur Allen and Mary Clingan, lived on the north half. Arthur Allen, Clark's father-in-law, was elected reeve when Osgoode Township was given its first municipal government in 1950. Next is James, who married Jane McKean, and they lived in South Gore. And then Marianne. When she was coming to Canada, her husband and her 2 sons were buried at sea from typhoid. According to Jean, she lived in a hut along the St. Lawrence, and her 4 other children were raised by her brothers Alexander and Clark. Marianne Kyle was her name. She eventually married widower Robert Cleland, who had 10 children already. His first wife was Sophia Elizabeth Wright, who died around age 37. Robert and Marianne had 5 more children together: Clark, Bertha, Fred, Ernest, and Edith. Last of Robert and Matilda's kids is Alexander. Moving down the family tree, we have Clark and Jane's children. They had 10. Matilda died at 6 years old as the result of a ram when she was crossing the fields to her grandmother Allen's home. Arthur Moses died young. He was 5 years old, I think, when he was killed by a tree that was felled by his father. Margaret married John Craig, and they had 8 kids and lived in North Gore. Their children were Jane, Matilda, Esther, Clark, Eldon, Emma, Annie, and Horace. William John married Margaret Emily Acton, and she's the daughter of George Acton and Anna Wilson, and they had 8 children. They owned the sawmills, which were run with the help of their sons. William also built the Anglican church in Osgoode, as well as supplying the windows for the SS5 school, also known as Blanchfield School. I'll tell you more about Margaret Acton's family in a future podcast episode. That's my family. Her sister Mary Jane married William Owens, and William and Mary Jane were my great-great-grandparents, parents of my great-grandmother Edith Mary Owens, who married John Richard Blanchfield. William and Margaret's children were Clark Wesley, and he ran the Osgoode and West Osgoode sawmills. Byron, and he ran the Vernon sawmill. Maud, Chester, Edgar ran the Queon sawmill, and Ethel. Next down the line are Clark, who married Maria Aldridge. They had 10 kids. He was a public school inspector for Haldimand County, so did not remain in this area. Joseph Allen married Mary Cleland. She's the daughter of Robert Cleland and Sophia Eliza Wright, and they had 5 children. They lived on the lot settled by Alexander Moses. Joseph was elected councillor of Osgoode in 1905 and re-elected the following year. At both elections, he received the highest number of votes polled, and he became a justice of the peace and was a school trustee. Joseph and Mary's children are Alexander, Sophia Eliza, Wesley Allen, Gertrude Louise, and Mabel Donalda, and she married William Klein, Billy Reed, and they had 3 children, Jean, Helen, and Louise. And Jean Reed is the one who wrote the Pioneer Families excerpt about the Moses family. Next is Matilda Jane, and she married Banford McKendry, and they lived on West Half Lot 33, Concession 4 at Dalmany, where they built the present beautiful brick home before leaving for South Gore. And their children were William Clark, James Banford, Francis McLaughlin, Edward Ernest, John Judson, and Ira Russell. Mary married Thomas Cowan, and they lived in Ottawa. They had 3 children. Sarah Ann married Vance Allen, and he's the widower of Elizabeth Reed, and he had 5 children: Mary, Fanny, Hamilton, Maggie, and Jenny. James married Priscilla Heron, and they farmed in West Osgoode. They had 6 children and built Dr. Dowd's house. And apparently he was also an auctioneer. James and Priscilla's kids were Leafy, Roy, Laurie, Alexander, and Alan Orland. So, a few gaps in the Moses family. As you can see, there's probably lots more information available somewhere in this family tree now, but you can see how they came to this area. And although many of them suffered tragedy, or a few of them suffered tragedy, they seem to be very well established in the community, definitely as business owners in the Osgoode area because of the mills. And that is the Moses family as our historical segment for this week. Today's Community Voices is a poem about Osgoode, written by Sue Knippel Potvin, and it's called Oh So Good, Osgoode. Hear us, you guys and gals of the village of Osgoode. It's proud we are to live here in a place that is so good. We didn't always call it home, not like the Boyds and Kerrs, the Blanchfields and the Taylors, the Ferguson, his and hers, and many other families, too long to mention all, plus those who came here later, knowing they would have a ball. They came from every corner, adding to the village flavor. The Cleland Scottish burr is sure a sound we all do savor. O'er the years we've welcomed folk of all countries and color. We've even got some francophones. God bless them all, we holler. In Osgoode we all live in peace, at least on major issues. If one of you don't think it's true, we've got for you some tissues. You new folks, did you know that we were once called Osgoode Station? We had hotels and restaurants, the best in all the nation. The last train stopped for people in October 57. In 61, station was dropped. Osgoode was still a heaven. Business slowed, life quieted down. It was a sleepy village. But growth has hit in recent years. We've got a brand new image. The narrow street of yesteryear became an awful mess. The region just repaved it all and moved some poles, God bless. But then we cried, remove the snow. We are not billy goats to travel down sidewalks hip deep to spend all our bank notes. For months we cried our cause. We complained for hours and hours until our council voted right. Thank them and Albert Bowers. Sure, we have our problems. They come and then they go. It's typical of our country, this great land of sun and snow. There's GST, free trade, French and English and the loony, and wondering what to do about that guy Brian Mulrooney. Hang in there, you Osgoodians, Canadians one and all. Our country's still the greatest in the world as we recall. To keep beloved Canada up there atop the heap, we must first be good citizens in the towns where we each sleep. If each and every town in this great country that is ours would practice love thy neighbor, we'd shower towers of flowers. Amongst our many cultures who enrich us shore to shore, including Native Indians, true Canadians to the core. Our top honcho he often refers to Osgoode as oh so good, and we agree we've something great that's certainly understood. And with the question often asked these days across our land, what is it that Canadians want? Does anyone understand? We want what we have, the best in the world, from Moscow to Grenada. No one has it better than we do in Osgoode, Canada. By Sue Knippel Potvin, written on July 1st, 1991. Isn't that cute? It's fun. Sue Ackerman Knippel Potvin was a well-known resident of Osgoode and was a tireless volunteer and champion of our village, its businesses, its residents, and generally our community. I knew her mostly as Sue Knippel, a journalist, and she was a contributor to many of the local community newspapers. Sue was a constant sight at any community event, and I just remember you could never miss her because she was so tall and she had that curly blonde hair. I think she would like this podcast very much. She had 4 children with Peter Knippel Sr. before moving to Osgoode. She got into real estate after her journalism career. She was from Nova Scotia, born Judith Sue Ackerman, and if you know the little yellow house on Nixon, that's where she lived with Donald Potvin, who she married in 1993. In 1996, Sue was awarded the Order of Osgoode for her tireless work to establish the Osgoode Township Long-Term Care Facility, which we all now know today as the Osgoode Care Centre. Sue and Dawn moved back to Nova Scotia in 1999 to be closer to her family, and the last few years of her life she spent in their glorious garden. Sue Knippel Potvin passed away in 2007 after a short battle with cancer at the age of 70. I want to thank Sue for all of her contributions to our community and honor her on my podcast. And that's our Community Voices segment for this week. In today's mental health moment, I want to share a short news article from the Winchester Press written in 1984. And the headline is Metcalfe CC Mercury Rises. Organizers of a $600,000 fundraising drive here for a 70-bed care center say their goal is in sight and that construction of the building is expected to begin this fall. The $2.7 million community project, the result of 5 years of research and planning by a group of local citizens, was given the green light by the province last spring. The center will be used for care of the elderly, accident victims, and those with deteriorating illnesses. Since then, the group has been conducting a massive fundraising campaign to come up with the township's share of the cost. According to Sue Knippel, president of the center's 1984 board of directors, the community response has been fantastic. A giant mock thermometer at the site, she said, now shows a fundraising total of nearly $350,000. The money was raised, she added, through the combined efforts of local service groups, church organizations, and local businesses. Although the project has been guaranteed funding from all levels of government, Knippel warned that the current door-to-door canvassing campaign has to continue. We must not show any degree of complacency, she said, since we have a long way to go before the mercury in our thermometer reaches the top. The Osgoode Care Centre did get built, as you may know, and is now a long-term care facility home to 100 residents. I'll share more about the care centre in a future episode of the podcast, but I thought that was a nice article to share today when I came across it in my research about Sue. The care centre certainly gives peace of mind to the residents' families who trust the amazing staff to care for their loved ones late in their lives. And that's why it's this week's mental health moment. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Osgoode Community Chronicles. I hope you enjoyed our connections from the past and our taste of the present. Now you know a little bit more about the Moses Sawmill that was such a big part of the village and our area history, and the Moses family, and a little bit about one of our well-known and hard-working advocates in Sue Knippel Potvin. Communities like ours depend on volunteerism. Nothing happens without the efforts of volunteers. If you aren't helping with an event or activity or a nonprofit in your community, look into it. It's rewarding and it leaves a lasting impact on the members of our community. Remember, you can catch all of our past episodes on Spotify, Apple, Google, Amazon, or anywhere you listen to your favorite podcasts. You can also tune in at our website, osgoodecommunitychronicles.com, and follow us on social media on Facebook and Instagram. Don't miss next week's episode, where we'll share more news and events in your area and more stories of families past and present. Thanks again for supporting our snapshot of our local community. I'm Tracy Daviero, and this has been Osgoode Community Chronicles, keeping our rural spirit alive, one story at a time. I'll see you next week.